Good Wednesday, everyone, and welcome in to take two of our daily Bible reading for today, May 31st, the last reading in the month of May for this year. I've done this already. I feel like I'm doing a little bit of deja vu, but after I got done, I was looking at the recording and it just was not, I don't know what happened. It was very glitchy. It was grainy. It skipped from scene to scene and it just wasn't going to work. So here we go again. We're going to do it hopefully a better way this time, so we can have a much more productive reading than we would have had I used that first recording. So let me go and get the text up on the screen for us today, which is going to be Deuteronomy chapters 25 and 26. Do the double chapter today just to keep up our pace so we can make it all the way through what we find in Esther. This year for our reading, we're reading the Old Testament historical writings, reading what begins in Genesis and going through the book of Esther. And I hope that if you've been with us all along the way, or even just part of the way, that it has been beneficial for you reading through these texts and becoming more familiar with this portion of God's word that we might be less familiar with than other portions. So let's read together here in Deuteronomy chapter 25, beginning in verse number 1. Deuteronomy 25, verse number 1, if there is a dispute between men, they are to go to court, and the judges will hear their case. They will clear the innocent and condemn the guilty. If the guilty party deserves to be flogged, the judge will let him down and be flogged and will make him lie down and be flogged in his presence with the number of lashes appropriate for his crime. He may be flogged with 40 lashes, but no more. Otherwise, if he is flogged with more lashes than these, your brother will be degraded in your sight. Do not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain. When brothers live on the same property and one of them dies without a son, the wife of the dead man may not marry a stranger outside the family. Her brother-in-law is to take her as his wife, have sexual relations with her, and perform the duty of a brother-in-law for her. The first son she bears will carry on the name of the dead brother, so his name will not be blotted out from Israel. But if the man doesn't want to marry his sister-in-law, she is to go to the elders at the city gate and say, my brother-in-law refused to preserve my brother's or his brother's name in Israel. He isn't willing to perform the duty of a brother-in-law for me. The elders of this city will summon him and speak with him. And if he persists and says, I don't want to marry her, then his sister-in-law will go up to him in the sight of the elders, remove his sandal from his foot, and spit in his face. Then she will declare, this is what is done to a man who will not build up his brother's house. And his family name in Israel will be the house of the man whose sandal was removed. If two men are fighting with each other, and the wife of one man steps in to rescue her husband from the one striking him, and she puts out her hand and grabs his genitals, you are to cut off her hand. Do not show pity. Do not have differing weights in your bags, one heavy and one light. Do not have differing measures in your house, a larger and a smaller. You must have a full and honest weight, a full and honest dry measure, so that you may live long in the land Yahweh your God is giving you. For everyone who does such things and acts unfairly is detestable to Yahweh your God. Remember what the Amalekites did to you on the journey after you left Egypt. They met you along the way and attacked all your stragglers from behind when you were tired and weary. They did not fear God. When Yahweh your God gives you rest from all the enemies around you in the land Yahweh your God is giving you to possess as an inheritance, blot out the memory of Amalek under heaven. Do not forget. Chapter 26. When you enter the land Yahweh your God is giving you as an inheritance, and you take possession of it and live in it, take some of the first of all the land's produce that you harvest from the land and Yahweh your God is giving you, and put it in a basket. Then go to the place where Yahweh your God chooses to have his name dwell. When you come before the priest who is serving at that time, say to him, today I will declare to Yahweh your God that I have entered the land Yahweh swore to our ancestors to give us. Then the priest will take the basket from you and place it before the altar of Yahweh your God. And you are to respond by saying in the presence of Yahweh your God, my father was a wandering Aramaean. He went down to Egypt with a few people and resided there as an alien. Then he became a great, powerful, and populous nation. But the Egyptians mistreated and oppressed us. and forced us to do hard labor. So we called out to Yahweh, the God of our ancestors, and Yahweh heard our cry and saw our misery, hardship, and oppression. Then Yahweh brought us out of Egypt with a strong hand and an outstretched arm, with terrifying power and with signs and wonders. He led us to this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. I have now brought you the first of the land's produce that you, Yahweh, have given me. You will then place the container before Yahweh your God and bow down to him. You, the Levites, and the resident aliens among you will rejoice in all the good things Yahweh your God has given you and your household. When you have finished paying all the 10th of your produce in the 3rd year, the year of the 10th, you are to give it to the Levites, resident aliens, fatherless children, and widows, so that they may eat in your towns and be satisfied. Then you will say in the presence of Yahweh your God, I have taken the consecrated portion of my house. I have also given it to the Levites, resident aliens, fatherless children, and widows, according to all the commands you gave me. I have not violated or forgotten your commands. I have not eaten any of it while in mourning, or removed any of it while unclean, or offered any of it for the dead. I have obeyed Yahweh my God, and have done all you commanded me. Look down from your holy dwelling from heaven, and bless your people Israel and the land you have given us as you swore to our ancestors, a land flowing with milk and honey. Yahweh your God is commanding you this day to follow these statutes and ordinances. Follow them carefully with all your heart, with all your soul. Today you have affirmed that Yahweh is your God, and that you will walk in his ways, keep his statutes, commands, ordinances, and obey him. And today Yahweh has affirmed that you are his own possession, as he promised you, that you are to keep all his commands, that he will elevate you to praise, fame, and glory above all the nations he has made, and that you will be a holy people to Yahweh your God, as he promised. And that is Deuteronomy chapters 25 and 26. Now, as we're reading that, you might be sounding, wow, that seems like it's kind of winding something down. And yet we still have 8 more chapters or so in Deuteronomy. And that's because this closes out this middle section, which many have referred to as the legal code. It really depends on how you estimate the beginning of this. Some say that this begins in chapter 5. Some would say later on in chapter 12. But wherever it begins, this legal portion where it just details all these various commands and statutes and ordinances, where that is specified and the need for them to obey them, it ends here in chapter 26. So we'll just say we'll make it the biggest range possible. Beginning in chapter 5, going through 26, we have all of these command statutes and ordinances that they are to follow. And it's good, or I shouldn't say it's good. I mean, it is good, but it is natural that Moses would spend his last moments with the Israelites, his last opportunity before them to speak, to remind them of all of these things that were going to be very pertinent to their living within the land. Because that's what he says often. It's not if you get in the land, but it's when you get in the land. When you get there, these are the expectations that you are to strive to uphold so that you can be God's special people. Now, for today's reading, and of course, what we're seeing here is what has been said today, as it is stated in the text, is not just what we've read today for us, but what has been read, as I mentioned, over the past 20 some chapters. But today's section, I think, picks up a bit from where we see previously in chapter 25, verse 1, just talking about justice, that whenever you have two people that are at odds with one another, whenever there's a dispute, you're going to take it before the judges, they're going to make a ruling, and the one who's guilty is going to be punished. Now, he might be flogged. The number of floggings that he receives just depends on whatever is appropriate for his crime, but he's not to receive more than 40, because going beyond 40 would be degrading to him. It would be humiliating to him, because he's a person, because he is an image bearer of God, and specifically because he's an Israelite, being one of God's special people. He is deserving of dignity and respect, even though he is wrong. So you don't give him more than 40 lashes. We might remember to the New Testament where they would give 40 lashes minus 1 to make sure they did not cross that 40 lash threshold. Now, what's interesting is right after that, not only does God care for the people, but he also cares for the nature, really. I guess we'll say it that way. We see numerous places where the land has protections for it, where you don't where you give it time to rest every so often. Well, here you see with the animals, with the oxen, don't muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain. Don't keep it from eating while it's working. Provide for it while it's working. The New Testament applies this to preachers and even the elders as well in 1 Corinthians chapter 9 and 1 Timothy chapter 5. Beginning in verse number 5, we see the law concerning levirate and marriage. I want to note that this is very specific as far as what needed to happen in order for this ruling to be carried out. Number one, the brothers had to live on the same land. Number two, the brother has to die having left no children. So it seems that by the time we get to Ruth, especially, that these guidelines have expanded some to where Boaz is just the nearest male redeemer. But nonetheless, the issue here is that it was very important for names to continue on, just as it was important for land to remain with certain families and not to be completely, it's not completely to completely change hands. So is the name to carry on. Again, just very important to the Israelite culture. And if a brother died without having a son to carry on that name, then it was, according to God here, the brother-in-law's responsibility to have a son with his sister-in-law so that his brother's name can continue on. Was a very selfless act to be able to do such a thing, because that child, which in all reality belongs to him, would actually carry on the name of his brother and would therefore receive the inheritance of his brother instead of him, again, that being his actual son, receiving the inheritance. So again, a very selfless act to be done. But if a man was not selfless, and said if he was selfish, then there was this process they would go through, taking off the sandal, basically saying, hey, you're a coward, you're selfish, and his name would be degraded in that moment. In this particular situation. Verses 11 and 12, we see this issue where two men are fighting, a wife steps in, has some inappropriate touching going on. The text says just very clearly that, you're to cut off her hand. And it seems that this is purposeful. This might be a way to maybe maim the man, might be the understanding behind this, but whatever it is, this the one time I think we see within the law that there was very much directly commanded mutilation to take place. You were to cut off her hand if she does such a thing as this. So very serious for her to do this. Do not show her pity. Whenever it came to weights and measures, they were to be fair and to be honest in what they were doing, because in doing such things unfairly, it was detestable to Yahweh. It was detestable to him. That language is used as well for things such as what the Canaanites did with their children, make them pass through the fire. That was detestable. So to be dishonest towards your fellow man and to take advantage of him was something that God very much hated. And unfortunately, we're going to see in Israel's history later on in Amos chapter 8 and verses 4 through 6, this is something that they unfortunately did engage in. To finish out chapter 25, we see the revenge on the Amalekites. The issue here is the fact that as they were passing through the land that Israel was, the Amalekites attacked them, but attacked the weakest ones who were at the back. And it says that they attacked all your stragglers from behind. They took advantage of the weak. They had no consideration for the helpless. We can read about this in Exodus chapter 17. Therefore, remember what they did to you. Do not forget it, verse 19. And in the process, you are to make the Amalekites to be forgotten. So we can contrast that what we see with the levirate marriage, in that they wanted the name of the son and the brother to be remembered going forward. Here, because of their, again, treachery towards those who were helpless and weak, you are to blot out their name from under heaven. Again, God does not take pleasure in those who mistreat their fellow man. That's chapter 25. Chapter 26 gets into the giving of the first fruits. Really, the bottom line here, and what we see within verses 1 through 11 is, because God has blessed us so abundantly, because he has been so faithful to us and blessing us, we must be faithful in showing our appreciation to him by returning to him what he has given us. Verses 5 through 10 have this little speech that would be said, where they have the father that was a wandering Aramean, that's referring to Jacob, and he went down to Egypt, and then they were mistreated, and then God brought us out and brought us to this land. And this really is the very basis of Israel's theology, the way they understood who God was and what he expected of them. It was a theology that was based on history and the interactions that they had with Israel. But what's interesting is that they identified themselves even with their forefathers. They use pronouns like us, we called out. He heard our cry, our misery. He brought us out of Egypt. Although this generation was not the generation to be brought out of Egypt, they identified with their forefathers because they recognized that this is who they belong to. They belong to this community. They belong to this family. They belong to this nation. So what God did for the forefathers is what he was doing for them as well. And therefore, that is what demanded that there be this giving back to God, this commitment to being faithful to God and giving back to him what he had blessed them with. This is true as well for the giving of the 10th in the third year, the tithe, and that was to take place every third year. We read about this in chapter 14 and verses 28 through 29, that they were to give this tithe to help those who were needy, like the Levites, the resident aliens, the fatherless, the widows, and they were to do this with the right heart. They were to do this in the correct manner, that this is the consecrated portion, that I have not violated or forgotten your commands. I did not eat any of it while mourning. I did not remove any of it while unclean. I did not offer any of it for the dead. I have obeyed Yahweh my God, and I have done all you commanded me. So look down from heaven, your holy dwelling, and bless your people Israel in the land you have given as you swore to our fathers, a land flowing with milk and honey. And this just speaks to the covenantal nature that was present between God and his people. Again, I will be your God, you will be my people. If you obey me, I will bless you. And if I bless you, it's because you have been obedient to me. That's just the way this relationship works. And they recognize that to be the case. They recognize that if they were faithful to God, that God was very gracious and would be faithful to them. The ending of chapter 26, and again, this last section on the legal code, echoes what we've seen a couple of times in chapter 5 and verse 1 and chapter 12 and verse 1. We see similar language to Yahweh your God is commanding you this day to follow these statutes and ordinances and to follow them carefully with all of your heart and with all of your soul. Basically, remember that he is your God again, that he entered into this covenant with you by his grace and by his mercy. He allowed you to be his people, and it is incumbent upon you. It is your responsibility to respond appropriately to him, to honor him as your God, and to be faithful to him in every way, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, commands, ordinances, and to obey him. And again, if you do that, and today Yahweh has affirmed that you are his own possession, as he promised you, that you are keeping all his commands, and that if you do this, that he will elevate you to praise, fame, and glory above the nations he has made, and that you will be a holy people to Yahweh your God, as he promised you. Out of all the nations of the earth, Yahweh said, I chose you, Israel, to be my people. And you are a special people. I'm doing things in you and through you that no one else can boast about. So therefore be faithful. Be faithful as I have been faithful to you. And you will be a holy people to a holy God. And certainly as we think about our position as Christians today and the covenant that we have with God through Jesus, we should see ourselves a lot in the Jews and in the nation of Israel, for the fact that they were chosen to be God's special people, and he cared for them, and the expectation was for them to be faithful to him in every way. That's really our position as well, because the church often it pictures Israel so much. I mean, that's what Bill has been doing in his Bible studies on Sunday morning in the auditorium classes, talking about how we can learn a lot about who we are as Christians, the church, through Israel itself. We should see ourselves in Israel and learn from them, learn the reality that faithfulness leads to blessings, and learn that when we stray from faithfulness to God, that bad things happen. So we can learn a lot from this text here. No, we might not be under obligation to follow these commands as they're set forth here in many ways, but there is the underlying principle of an obligation to be faithful, that we need to be faithful to a faithful God, and that we can be a holy people before a holy God if we will show covenant loyalty to the one that has entered into this covenant with us. Again, we are blessed to be in a covenant with God through Jesus, and we would be fools to reject that and to turn away from that, for there are great blessings that come through being in covenant with God through Jesus. If you have any questions about this text here in Deuteronomy chapter 25 or 26, please feel free to leave that in the comments section below. Looking forward to seeing everybody tonight for our Bible study at 7 p.m. Hope that we will see you there. And also take a minute to say happy birthday to Heather Boyd. It is her birthday today. We wish her a very happy birthday. Again, looking forward to seeing everybody tonight, and hope we'll also see you tomorrow as we read together from Deuteronomy chapter 27. Take care and God bless.